Healthcare is becoming less human, and convenience is replacing care. So, how can we restore human dignity to the heart of medicine? Hi, I'm Nicole Scheidel, and this is our weekly look at life issues in healthcare. And today I'm joined by Amanda to talk about getting old and what a little bit of aging. Um, I've been thinking these days about vulnerability and how we start in vulnerability when we're born and we end in vulnerability when we die. But in our second vulnerability, we have the hope of having some wisdom that we obviously didn't have as a baby. And I made me think about how we learn to treasure that wisdom, how we learn to be gracious towards ourselves and others in that weakness, and if that is really a school of tenderness for us, a school where we can learn generosity. And so I think this week you and I were talking about some of the things that are happening in Rome because that's where you are. And I thought it would be really interesting to take that perspective and talk our way through some of that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Exactly. Great to be back, Nicole. And yes, I've noticed that lately, week to week, Pope Francis has been speaking about old age. This is a theme for what's called his Wednesday audiences, where he greets many people and offers some teachings on an issue that is close to his heart and of interest to all people of goodwill, really. And so he's chosen old age. And some of the reflections and ways of speaking, I think, really get to these themes that we've been talking about, a school of tenderness and how to create a more generous society. So we're going to look at some of the excerpts from his recent addresses and share some of the stories that they evoked in our own minds. So the first one is, most recently he was speaking about Ecclesiastes, and he was speaking about the importance of not giving into discouragement in old age, in not losing the spark of hope and the vigor of life. And he says that there are these demoralizing effects of disenchantment, and they're particularly harmful when they're in the elderly, and that the elderly really have a task to radiate the hope of a life, a long-lived life filled with experience and perspective on those experiences that can help give a sort of stability and orientation to the generations that are rising. So he says, if the elderly, who have seen it all by that time in their lives, keep intact their passion for justice, then there is hope for love. Not to lose that enthusiasm for justice. Because a culture that presumes to measure everything and manipulate everything also ends up producing a collective demoralization of meaning, a demoralization of love, a demoralization of goodness. So, what strikes you in those first words?
Yeah, I was really struck by that last sentence in particular, and I see that all the time. And I think it makes sense in the culture we live in, where we have success metrics for everything. You have, you wear a Apple Watch or a Fitbit or something. You have success metrics for your day, like did you walk enough? Did you get enough sleep? But how do you find success metrics for aging? And I think the key is to move from success to significance, to start thinking about and investing in significant relationships in your life. So to think about how you can volunteer, how you can mentor. And I don't mean mentoring in the formal sense that you might have in a business setting, but mentoring, passing on your wisdom that you have gained through your life to those who are younger than you, who could really appreciate a listening ear and who really want to know what you think. I know one individual that was looking after a woman who was 100, and she said it was amazing because I would say to her, I'm having this problem in my life. What do you think? And this woman was just a font of knowledge and perspective that she would never have because she's not 100 yet. So I think the elderly have so much to offer. And finally, just loving the people in your life. It's so easy to turn inward and just think about how hard things are getting, especially when, your body doesn't work as well as it did when you were 21. and you do have aches and pains that you didn't have when you were younger. But to look outward and see, who can I love in my life? Can I share a smile? Can I say hello? Can I brighten up somebody else's day? I think that outward looking and investing in relationships in terms of significance can have a huge impact, and really not only impact your own life, but also the entire culture.
That's so good. And I really appreciate that success to significance, because I can think often about how, as a young person, I'm always being asked, well, what are you going to do next? What's next? What's next? And sometimes I get a bit sad when I think about the fact that this is not really a question that gets put to much older people, because there's a sort of regard that maybe there isn't a next. And so I think perhaps there are challenges with this question that are being touched upon with this success metric, because we've all heard the expression, like, we're human beings rather than human doings. And I love the quotation by Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who asks the question, how should I live the life that I am? And so in this, it's not how should I live the life that I have, or what should I do, but based on who I am, my story, my identity, the web of relationships in my life, how then shall I live? And when that's your orientation, when your life comes from who you are, then there's a longevity of purpose at really every stage of life. And you always have something to give, because you're always having that capacity to love. So good points there. On
Okay.
on another week, Pope Francis was speaking about the book of Job. And what I really liked in this occasion is he was speaking about how in the book of Job, Job really protests with God. And what he was commenting about is how sometimes people would say to the Pope, oh, but Father, I protested against God because I have this and that problem. And he said, well, that is a way to pray. And when young people object against their parents, it's a way of attracting their attention and of asking that they take care of them. So if you have some wound in your heart, some pain, and you want to object even to God. And so to not be afraid of prayers of protest. And he even says, do not imprison your prayer with preconceived paradigms. And to look at that on the day-to-day level in family relationships. What is it to imprison by preconceived paradigms? It's this maybe sentence of not wanting to be a burden, rather than protesting, oh, this food is actually cold, or oh, I'm really not sleeping well, I'm uncomfortable. These protests that can be very normal and natural in family life, especially with aging family members, are actually a form of really giving expression to sincere and authentic relationship. And I think what he's trying to get at there is not only in this biblical book, but what it teaches us about human nature, and about how we need more protest. We need more sincerity within our relationships, because it actually is a sign of affection, of intimacy, of closeness. And that is the kind of poverty that we need to combat by just getting really real and sincere about our needs, and about being able to receive the protest of others without trying to make excuses for why people are suffering, or to put easy, quick fix solutions before them, but to really just abide that difficulty and take it in. So in that one, he also says that the elderly who find the path of this testimony, who turn their resentment for their loss into a tenacity for awaiting God's promises, there is a change from resentment for the loss toward the tenacity of following God's promises. These elderly people are an irreplaceable garrison for the community in facing the excesses of evil. I'll just say that one more time. These elderly people are an irreplaceable garrison for the community in facing the excesses of evil. What do you think he has in mind there, and what did it bring to your mind?
Yeah, actually, I have two thoughts. I'll speak to this, and then I want to go back to speak about something you said earlier. But talking about this irreplaceable garrison, what it brings to my mind is this idea that particularly individuals who have experience in life can see that if you stand up for what is true and good and right, in the end, that prevails. So it's worthwhile to strive for goodness and truth and beauty and justice, because in the end it prevails. It may take a while, but you see that things that are corrupt, things that are evil, disintegrate, they fall apart.
There will be a
And
vindication.
it is a vindication, and it's also a witness to that, because you'll see, in your own life, there are consequences to bad decisions, and those consequences do come back to, you have to suffer through them. And so that is wisdom that gets passed on, and it is a light to the community, to have them kind of stand up to evil and to say it's worthwhile striving against it. And then the other thing you talked about a little bit back was this whole idea of protest and not wanting to be a burden, but then protesting about things that maybe weren't going so well. It makes me think a little bit about how we grow. So your muscles grow when they are stressed, right? You lift weights to put stress on your muscles, and then your muscles get stronger. You run, you practice. If you want to run a marathon, you go out and train. You train to get stronger. And so, how do we train in generosity or tenderness if we don't have to meet things that are hard? And so, when our individuals in relationships with us protest maybe against our behavior or our neglect or our not paying attention to them, it does help us stretch and help us grow in those virtues of generosity, of tenderness. And that's a good thing. It may not feel like a good thing at the moment, but in the end, it's very good for us if we can grow in our capacities to love and to care for others.
Yeah, that's right. That's good. Cool. Another week, the topic was memory and testimony, and it was all about the importance of hearing stories handed on personally. I really liked this because it was about how listening personally and directly to a story is irreplaceable. He says reading about it in books or watching it in films, consulting on the internet, however useful, it's just not the same thing as hearing a story that is being handed down through the concrete transmission from the old to the young. And why is this absence? Why is this absent in our culture? Why is it not happening more? And he says because this new civilization has the idea that the old are waste material. The old should be discarded. This is brutal. No, it mustn't be like that. There is a tone and style of communication to direct person to person storytelling that no other medium can replace. An older person, one who has lived a long time and receives the gift of a lucid and passionate testimony of his or her history, is an irreplaceable blessing. Are we capable of recognizing and honoring this gift of the elderly? And what this made me think of is how when I was 18 and traveled on the March of Remembrance and Hope Holocaust study trip with 60 students from all across Canada, we went with two Holocaust survivors. And we realized through traveling with them for 10 days to Germany and Poland that we really did have a precious and irreplaceable gift by their presence. We realized that we were among the last young people to travel with them to these places, to hear the stories of what they suffered and what they survived from them directly. And I think for a lot of people on that trip, the kind of adopted grandparents that these two survivors became also inspired us to connect in much deeper ways with our own grandparents and with more elderly people in our lives. And I think that's okay, that sometimes it takes stepping outside of a normal context to learn these lessons. Sometimes it takes going to a restaurant and leaving home in order to have those conversations and to receive those stories, or or taking a walk or going for a little trip. I think that's very natural that sometimes when we step away and there's that space to receive those stories, it's a time of that intimacy and affection that becomes most memorable. It helps to remember the context in which you heard those stories for the first time, and also just the one-to-one nature of the storytelling, the kind of set apartness from ordinary life. There's a sort of valuing, taking time aside to specifically go and hear those stories. So whether it's on a Holocaust study trip or whether it was with my grandfather on our Italian restaurant dates, there were these memorable occasions of learning the irreplaceable kinds of stories that could be received personally, and just also about the survivors. The one of the survivors with whom I traveled, he ended up being involved in a project that basically um, created a hologram of him, and so the the virtual reality experience that students can now have is that they recorded a whole bunch of different questions that have been put to him in the past, hundreds of questions, and then they recorded him answering all of these different questions so that when he passes away, future generations can at least have a simulation of asking the questions to his hologram and hearing the kinds of answers given the longevity of his experience telling his story. And when I learned about this and when I saw the whole like CNN feature about it, I thought, wow, what a gift that my group had in actually traveling with him. There's no way that sitting in an auditorium, putting a question to a hologram compares remotely to walking through these former concentration camps hand in hand, where tears came down our face and there was so much tacticity to the experience. It was so much more real. And so it is important to have these experiences that teach us to differentiate, because otherwise we live in a world of all relationships that are virtual or mediated by technology, and we recognize that they have their shortcomings. We look forward to when we can embrace and have meals together and not only be conducting even these conversations only online.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think it's really important to even recognize how deep roots make such a difference in our own lives. Because when you're rooted, it really helps you know who you are. I think
Mm-hmm.
often of um, like my grandmother Catherine came from a place in Poland. I don't even know. I think it's in the Ukraine now. It's part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire that has shifted a lot. But she came to Canada when she was 16, and the rest of her family stayed in New York. But she traveled across Canada by herself by train. It came to Regina to take a job. The person who was supposed to meet her at the train for the job never showed up. Luckily, a doctor in town happened to be at the train station, spoke the same language she did, hired her to be a nanny for his young children, and she was able to survive. And I just think about the courage that it took to get on a train and leave everything behind, knowing at that time it wasn't like you could pick up the phone and talk to your family. You were really striking out on your own, and having the courage to do that and make a life. And it has helped me when I've had to move and do things to know that I have these roots that come from a place where they made a life, I can make a life. And I hope to give that to my children too through the stories of their ancestors so that they can see this long heritage that they have. And I think it really helps people feel rooted and feel like they belong somewhere. And that sense of belongingness is so important. And having those connections with seniors can help you find that sense of rootedness.
That's so true. That is something that has been such a theme throughout everything that Pope Francis has been saying in connection with identity. And it makes me reflect on how, whatever crises we see with what's been called identity politics, I think is sort of a distortion of this right sense of identity where we receive from our families a sense of rootedness, a sense of our story, where we fit within our community and our family, and who we are ourselves. All of this, like, there is something real to identity. There is something really meaningful for which we all long to know who we are and where and to whom we belong. And so, yeah, there's such a task before us of rediscovering what it is to establish our identities, not just by throwing up a profile photo and choosing a cover photo from our latest trip, but having a sense of continuity throughout the generations and seeing exactly parallels between our stories, or even how the stories of those who lived before us help to kind of breathe life into who we ourselves are, and to know where we're coming from in that sense. So yeah, I think that's a great story. Now, on to a bit more of a somber anecdote that I was quite surprised was shared by Pope Francis during a recent audience. This was on the importance of visiting between the generations, and I just love when he uses phrases like intergenerational solidarity and the importance of a symphony in society between the generations. So he said, "I'll tell you something personal. I used to love visiting nursing homes in Buenos Aires. I went often, I visited each one, and I remember once I asked a lady, 'And how many children do you have?' 'I have 4, all married with grandchildren,' and she started talking to me about the family. 'And do they come to visit?' 'Yes,' she said, 'they always come.' When I left the room, the nurse who had heard said to me, 'Father, she told a lie to cover up for her children. Nobody has come for 6 months.' 'This is discarding the old,' he said. So, yeah, what do you think of that,
Yeah, I
Nicole?
think that's so heartbreaking. It makes me think about this last couple months. We've kind of had to rally around my dad and help him move to a new place, and my sister has done a tremendous amount of work getting selling his old place, and just all the kids coming together to help dad, and how connected we were. And one of my brothers said, we're just so lucky to have each other, that we've all chipped in and helped support dad and been with him, and walked with him through this challenging time. And it's a gift. It's such a gift to be able to help him, but it's also a gift to be able to share that with my siblings, and that back and forth that we have, like, who's going to go take care of dad now? Can someone cover this? It's just that communication that builds that fabric of our family. And I think it's so powerful. And it also is, then I think, an example to my children
Mm.
how they should care for me when I get into that situation. And
Mhm.
I think that it's a beautiful witness that I've seen in my own family over the past couple months. And I know other families do that too, where they just have such a tenderness and a care for their parents, and they're there for them. And it really, it's impressive. And to me, it's, um, they radiate with joy because of the care that they've given their parents. It's tough, sometimes it's tiring, but at the end of the day, it's completely satisfying.
Mhm. Excellent. Thank you for that. Do you have anything to wrap up on
Yeah,
the different
just I,
addresses that he's been making?
I think it's really, really valuable for us to spend time thinking about our interactions with those who are older than us, whether we're close or far away from our elders, how we integrate them into our lives. Our particular North American culture has become quite fractured, and we don't have the kinds of extended family ties that we used to maybe 20 or a generation or two ago. And I think that has caused a lot of harm and hurt. And it's important for all of us to try and recreate or regenerate some of those ties, whether it's getting back in touch and repairing relationships, putting an emphasis on going to visit and see our elderly parents or aunts or uncles, or adopting a grandparent. I know that you adopted an older gentleman during the pandemic, and I think that was great for you and great for him. And I think that all of us could find an openness in our lives to bring more people in and make more connections.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a joy to explore these reflections, and thanks for the stories.
Take care. Have a good night.
So yeah.